I guess we should start now because I think we should.
Wait, Mico, are you posting this on YouTube after?
Yes, so I'm recording this and it's going on YouTube, and I'm not gonna cut anything because
Yeah.
Yeah, honest conversation. If anybody has like an opening question, like I said, you're welcome to start. Initial feelings about what happened today, just generally.
But who wants to go first about what happened today?
Okay, let's do this. If you want to go first, just raise your hand because I think there's a function that lets you raise your hand. Does anyone? Do you guys know how to use Zoom? I assume.
Girl, you dead ass like I was being like professor. But I mean, I think I can start with what happened today, at least from what I had heard and what I've seen.
Okay, cool. Thanks, John.
So in the middle of my psych class earlier today, that I had gotten like bombarded by a bunch of texts from a bunch of my friends, a bunch of people telling me about, oh, have you seen the news? Have you seen the news? Have you seen what's happening in the Capitol? Blah, blah, blah. There's Trump supporters and conservatives storming the Capitol building. They've broken in. And I was like, what is going on? Because I was in the middle of class. I mean, like, it's the Zoom era. And so like I was like, oh my God, like what's going on? I looked at it and I could not believe it. In 2021, the American democracy would be destabilized in such a way with like people refusing to accept election results, with Trump still touting that like that it was a stolen election, fanning the flames of the situation, people breaking into Congress in the middle of a session. It was just absolutely shocking to me that would happen. So that's kind of where I was at with it. Oh, I think we all have to be in agreement there, right? That like storming the Capitol building under any circumstances and breaking into it is a bad thing, right? We're all in agreement there.
So something like this similarly happened last year, but it wasn't the Capitol building. People were trying to storm the White House. What do you think is like a similar or a different aspect of it, or like how do you think it's similar, or do you think it's like different, or like?
Wait, when were people trying to storm for the Black Lives Matter thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Still on a like certain level, it's still sort of similar. Like the Capitol building and then the White House is still sort of similar. So I was wondering, like, what are your takes on it? Like, do you condone one? Do you condone both? You don't allow both. You don't allow one.
I mean, or go ahead. Sorry.
I'll chime in here.
Yeah.
The protests today were terrible, and I can't support them. But I have to say they're not as bad as CHOP or Chaz or what happened in Seattle, Portland, all across the West Coast where you guys are. Where there was a small break-in, no arson happened, no looting happened, no rioting happened. A few two windows were broken, and not a single policeman was injured. So it's a little unfair to compare. It's like apples and oranges, right?
I think that it's a little different only because like I agree with you that in both cases, I don't think rioting or protesting in this manner would be the most efficient way about going to achieve your goals for BLM or for the Trump supporters, I guess what we'll call them, who were there today. That being said, though, that I think in all the instances in which BLM protesters have rioted or protested in different parts of the country, none of that was done with the intent to stop like a democratic process. But today, the intent of these protesters was specifically done in order to halt or to make a stand against President-elect Joe Biden coming into office. Another thing I also want to say too is that in all the instances, like you're saying, not one police officer was harmed, and I'm not condoning violence against the police. But what I am saying is that in the instances that Black Lives Matter protesters or activists were out and about, the police were much more aggressive and much more swift with their action against them, as opposed to what happened today at the Capitol stairs. I think TYT actually even showed images of protests that happened in DC a couple months ago versus the protests that happened today. and the fact that there was no National Guard, no tear gas, no rubber bullets, nothing of that manner whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. When I was talking about this earlier today, can you name before today? Well, you know what, you're gonna say Charlottesville. So I was gonna say before today, can you name a right-wing riot or something to this magnitude? But Charlottesville, I can see where you would say that. But one organization has a preponderance of, or a predisposition. Every city in America, every like major city had riots and looting, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Trump supporters, realistically, this is the first time this has ever happened. And I do think that the Capitol Police had several days in advance and they should have prepared for this. And who would have thought that? But the thing is, who would have thought this would happen? Because it's never happened before. That's my point. Like it's never really happened before.
I get your point. You're saying that like it's not something that they would have expected to happen because like BLM as I guess a movement, or what's been stuck to a movement, is that this is kind of the nature of what will happen during these their protests, as opposed to in the Trump rallies and whatnot, which this originally I believe started off as a rally, right? That President Trump had called for. That it's not something that's typical of them. That I agree with.
Yeah.
I do think it's still a little different, only because when we take like Trump protesters or Trump supporters as a group, we're specifying these protesters specifically, as opposed to kind of when we look at BLM, we kind of slap the name of movement onto an entire race of people. So like, Black people in cities across the country, all the Black Lives Matter movements in each individual city were mostly, Black people out there fighting for, or in their ideas, fighting for their rights. I'm not condemning or saying that what they did was good or bad. I'm just saying what happened. As opposed with, the Trump movement, very like, the thing I was saying is that I think with BLM that it kind of like gets slapped to this idea of like, there's a couple of people within those movements and those protests who are violent and who loot and who burn things. But the name BLM kind of will get slapped to like the whole group of like protesters the whole country over. So even in cities where people were peaceful and there weren't any violent protests, the focus of course will be on the cities where there were a lot of rioting and protests, because as we all know, sensationalism themselves. Like I said, I'm not demonizing all Trump supporters across the entire country or anything like that, or saying all Trump supporters are bad, but specifically in this case, the ones who are at the Capitol are the ones that I'm saying that we should have an issue with, as opposed to how people see BLM as constantly being afraid of it being like a violent or dangerous group because, like I said, sensationalism. I don't know if that makes sense, or if there's anything I need to clarify about that.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is just like how we shouldn't judge BLM because it's only like a small percentage of people who actually loot and riot. The same thing we can like also like, at least in this instance, equate to Trump supporters, because yeah, the Trump supporters at Capitol Hill are the ones that like surged the government buildings, but all Trump supporters don't do that. And I saw that on, like, I know it doesn't count for much, but I was on like Reddit the entire time, on the conservative subreddit, and it was just overwhelmingly condemning like what was going on. So I think there is some truth to that, that yes, there are extreme Trump supporters, but just like there are extreme BLM members. I'm not sure how many of them actually support BLM and how many of them are just opportunists, like taking the opportunity to loot. But yeah, that kind of thing.
One of the problems I had today was I saw a lot of hypocrisy from people, Facebook friends and family members, and political colleagues as well, that were just condemning what was happening in DC, with just having absolute vitriol towards what was happening. And then if you scroll back to the protest, the racial protest earlier this year, radio silence. I mean, I was watching CNN today, and there was a lady out there saying, I smell smoke. It was a CNN reporter. I smell smoke, looking around, couldn't find anything. And then I remembered CNN just a few months ago having the banner, mostly peaceful protests with massive buildings on fire behind them. And just the reporting is what really frustrated me today. It was just, it pointed out the bias so specifically. I mean, it was just egregious the way that the reporting was in contrast to earlier this year.
CNN is definitely a left-leaning news network. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to be objective.
It wasn't even just CNN. I mean, like just all MSN or mainstream media, and yeah, even Fox News was driving me crazy with some of the reporting on it. Just, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, yeah. I'm surprised Fox was also like in favor of, or I guess left-lean. I don't know how I would describe it, but from what I've seen on news networks like OAN and Newsmax, they heavily condemned it, but that's not necessarily mainstream. So, yeah, but no, like I wouldn't expect CNN to necessarily be objective. I think news sources like BBC and NPR can be a little bit more objective. I did see them describing the riots a little bit more violently than CNN did. But I will say, and I don't know, this is probably going to be controversial. I will say that I'm not a huge fan of violent riots on either side. And I actually did condemn the violent riots back during BLM too, despite being a huge supporter of BLM. But I waited until like a week or two after, because I didn't want to take away from like their overarching message, which is, which I'm sure you know what their message is. As opposed to like the Trump rally, I condemned it immediately because it's more so, I don't know how to describe it. I think intent is key. Whether you agree or not, BLM is protesting because they believe Black people are dying, Black people are being shot. And whether or not, like, there are statistics out there, and I'd be happy to link you to sources that show Black people are shot disproportionately. But there are also other sources that go against
because
that. Yeah.
We've just read a couple of books that have other sources that I like to compare, and I Blackout with Candace Owens. He just read that one, and I'm about to. So yeah, please do, because
yeah, no, I will. Yeah, could I've seen your site too. There are other sources that disregard what I'm that go against what I'm saying. So it's just like which sources are right, not disregard. Sorry, go against what I say. So which sources are right, which sources are wrong. I don't know, but yeah, I'll link you those sources. But anyways, I think the key thing is intent. Despite what you believe or not, BLM believes that Black people are dying, like they face injustice, that kind of thing, and that's why they're writing. Let's say, like, I don't know, let's say the same thing was happening to any other demographic, that they genuinely believe their demographic was like facing systemic injustice, racism, that kind of thing. I think it's sort of reasonable to be outraged at that kind of thing, as opposed to, then you can do that same argument too for the Trump supporters, though. They genuinely believe, despite whether or not you believe that democracy was undermined, they genuinely believed that, and that's why they rioted. So I think, so again, I'm not trying to make one statement one way or the other. I just think intent is key. One side genuinely believes people face systemic injustice, and the other side genuinely believes that there is election fraud. And whether or not their thoughts on that is justified in violent rioting, is, we can discuss that. But
well, yeah. So I didn't get your point on that, though, right? Are you saying like,
well, my point,
systemic injustice, systemic racial injustice is greater than losing an election, so it's okay for them to riot? I didn't.
That's
understand.
my I don't want to go into it, but that is my personal opinion. Like, people dying is going to be more important than undermining an election, even though the election is undermined. Yeah.
How many? It was 18 Americans, unarmed Americans, died at the hands of police, and the majority of those were justified. Is that right?
I don't know about that one. Let me pull up some.
Are you saying like
well, listen, we don't have to get bogged down in statistics, but yes, please do pull it up. I'll pull it up.
I think the goal of this is not necessarily to go statistics for statistics, because the thing is that you can
Exactly,
always
that's what I
take
was getting
statistics.
at.
Right. Like, I mean,
And
everyone can
fire
pull
back.
out the books all day.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea is to what we can extrapolate from data that we've all read and succinct it down so people can better understand it. That's why we're all discussing this.
Right.
Okay.
I think mostly that, like, the reason that I'm on here necessarily, I'd like to say, is that the reasons that, like, we don't, like, violence or, like, breaking law in any sense of any writers should not be allowed. Like, you know, we were not watching this, and, like, I not me necessarily, I cannot speak for everyone. It was like, this is a great thing that is happening. You know, I was very upset that it had to come to this. I want us to be this, and I can say that I will give Joe Biden an honest and fighting chance, even though I don't like it. I hope he does great things. I hope that's what everyone did it, because I do not personally feel like Democrats did the same thing for Trump. So if I have to feel like I'm doing the higher road, fine. Like, I will be that bigger person, whatever. But if it comes to these things like election fraud, or like, should we defund the police, or like stacking the Supreme Court, there's so many bigger things that we can do. But trust me, over 80% of the things that we talk about, we agree on. Like, we were not in support of violence or storming the Capitol, if that makes sense.
No, yeah,
Sure.
I was gonna say that. Oh well, I don't know. Okay, yeah.
That was a
Can
lot.
you guys hear me or? No, sorry. I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. I totally agree with you on all of that. I think that the point here is that no one on either side really is for violence. Like, I don't think anyone on the left or the right like reasonably thinks that violence is the solution to any issue. The idea of America is that how can we unite all of our differences to make America better? Because in many ways, all the differences of its citizens have made it better. I don't think anyone's goal is to like start an all-out slugfest or civil war or anything. It's just sensationalism sells, you know, that like people like this idea of, oh, it's the end, you know, this president is going to ruin America, you know, they're going to tear it apart, because the right said it when Obama was inaugurated, and then the left said it when Trump was inaugurated. Both sides always want to just come for one president or the other. I do agree with you. I don't think Democrats gave Trump a fair shake right off the bat. I think he received a lot of hate and a lot of difficult struggles just right off the bat. But I don't think it was necessarily all that more difficult than what Obama dealt with in his inauguration. In a lot of ways, actually, I think it might have been a lot easier on him from just the people, for Trump with the people rather than the politicians. That being said, the point I wanted to get back to was earlier you were saying the hypocrisy in the news, right? I think you were talking about how all the news outlets like Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, how they all had like a biased, like inflammatory coverage of what happened at the Capitol, as opposed to the BLM protests, right? Is that what you said earlier?
Yes, yeah. I'll stand by that.
What I recall, at least, when the BLM protests were happening, was there was a lot of call from everyone saying like that there's violent protesters, looting, burning. I remember the imagery that people were seeing all over the news, and the condemnation on the internet of the BLM protests and people burning things down, and then a lot of BLM supporters defending the burning and the looting and the rioting. Again, I kind of am like Satvik that I personally wouldn't loot or riot. I was at the protest in Oakland, and I would never loot or riot anybody's home or business or anything like that, because I personally don't think that will enact long-term change. I don't think that will solve the problem. But I do understand the frustration and the anger that was a part of. I don't try to make this a Black Lives Matter issue versus Trump supporter issue. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because we talk about hypocrisy and we go back and forth with hypocrisy. As of, you know, Black people brought up like Tulsa, like, and how that was burned to the ground, which is where the Black Wall Street was. And then Trump supporters or conservatives on the other side say, well, you're burning down these places, and now we're using it this other way. And the problem with bringing up hypocrisy is that hypocrisy doesn't immediately negate the validity of what someone else does or the terribleness of it. We can say both the left and the right are being hypocrites, but that doesn't deny the fact that the burning of Tulsa and the burnings of homes and people's businesses and the breaking into the Capitol building are okay. They're all bad. Like, none of it is good. You know, calling one side or the other hypocrites though.
There are different levels of bad, right? Like if you jaywalk versus murder someone, there are different levels of bad, right? And so that's all I'm saying is like, and then placating one as being equal, or even in some of the rhetoric, even worse based on the rhetoric than the other. Like that's one. They're, yes, sure, they're all bad, but there are different levels of bad. Unless I mean, all sins are equal. Some people they're like, yeah, but like, not all crimes are.
I agree with you that we could definitely, that you're right. Now that's why we have different punishments and different determinations for different crimes about how bad something is. But I think another issue, if we're going to go there also, is that historically, crimes that have been perpetrated, like, you know, in these kinds of riots aren't condemned to the same extent as like BLM has been. Kind of like what we were saying earlier, that like the force with which this rally was met with, you did explain that, of course, Trump supporters don't necessarily have the history of violent protests. But still, I mean, I don't think anyone can tell me that DC doesn't have constant protection and awareness around it. I mean, it is the capital of the United States. You know, I mean, it happened right under their noses. I mean, it just seems to me very bizarre. And I don't know this verbatim, but before we went on the live stream, one of my friends who knew that we were going to be doing this had texted me and said that that I think whoever's in charge of the defense of DC actually had called to stop the National Guard from coming in. Okay, that did happen. I didn't verify it, but they actually halted the National Guard from coming in at any point to deal with this, which to me seems strange, even if they weren't there at first. Stopped it. So even if it wasn't like at first was something that was going to be done, as you know, what's it called? Preemptively, like with BLM, the fact that nothing happened after or during from the National Guard is still very bizarre to me.
So in terms
of equality and hypocrisy.
In terms of that, sorry if anyone wanted to go first, but I wanted to bring up something. I think I heard from my parents, like they watch the news very often, like right now, especially today, they were like really glued to the news, and they said that the person who called off the National Guard was Biden.
Biden called. Can he do that?
I don't know. But like,
what the fuck? That doesn't sound right.
So you think like Trump was the one who called off the National Guard?
I don't know if it was Trump. Well, that's what I heard, but that doesn't sound right either. So I don't know.
I'm just saying what I heard. I don't know if anyone has more verification on that. I'm just pointing out what I had heard.
I can Google it.
Okay, so who called off?
Yeah, we can do a quick Google search.
But you can continue.
But my point is that what we were saying earlier about hypocrisy is, yes, there's definitely levels of bad, and you know how bad a crime is and how bad things are and things can get. But I mean, it's always going to be tit for tat. Like, you know, Black people like go as far back as like reaching all the way back to like slavery and the Atlantic slave trade and the brutality then, and then bring it forward to now. And then it's kind of like, if we keep going back through history, we'll keep going tit for tat. I just don't think that like we can always kind of say like, oh, something worse was done to me as opposed to something else. I just don't think the hypocrisy argument helps move us forward. I think it just is something to discuss, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm reading, and this is from the New York Times, so I'm not sure how, like, what are your thoughts on how credible that is? What it's saying is, so Pence is the one who called in the National Guard. And it says Trump, it didn't say Trump stopped the National Guard, or like stopped them from coming. It said Trump didn't say one way or the other, despite the, like after the storming happened, like Trump didn't say one way or the other. So I don't think Trump necessarily stopped them. I know Pence is the one who called them in. So
okay, so
Pence
called in the National Guard.
Yeah. Or that's what the defense and administration officials say.
I think.
Yeah, President Trump initially rebuffed and resisted requests to mobilize the National Guard, according to an insider. So yeah, take what you want.
What you guys are trying to say, like it's a little bit suspicious, you know, like especially given the racial history, you know, and how they reacted to Black Lives Matter versus like, you know, Trump rallies or Trump protests. But then I guess one way you can think of it, aside from like it being suspicious, is that they probably learned a little bit, from their mistakes in police brutality, so they're not like acting on it as much now. That's another perspective who disagrees.
I think that's hilarious that it takes violence against Black people for them to learn, like, we shouldn't do violence, guys.
Well, I
Like,
think
now we shouldn't do violence. Like, now we learned, like, from the Black people that we shouldn't be violent.
I think, like,
It's
they
so
just
fucking weird.
really big.
But like they'll unlearn it for the next like BLM protest, which is hilarious. But then they'll
Oh my
relearn it.
goodness.
I don't know.
I'm dead.
I
but
I
I'm gonna
have
see real quick.
I definitely I think I'm in the same alignment. I think the expectation framing that's happening is really weird. That like BLM protests or any kind of protest but dominantly led by people of color is framed as things that could get out of hand really quickly. But then kind of the way like whenever like conservatives say they're going to do X, Y, and Z things, like in things like Charlottesville and in smaller places like Seattle and like places like Kentucky and whatnot, that like those things are not expected to get violent, which is really weird. I think it's kind of a great. It's like kind of the police and different law enforcement agencies give like white protesters like the benefit of the doubt, like they're not going to do that, but that kind of like benefit doesn't apply to like BLM protesters because we're expecting this to happen. Because like look, if like the protesters today were like met with the same kind of resistance that BLM protesters were made with, like I'm confused, like I don't understand why they weren't tear gassed today, or like why they weren't like pushed out, or like why there wasn't tanks, like why there wasn't mass arrests. Like walking into a Target is one thing. They walked into the Capitol. Like, let's be fucking real here. Like the Capitol. Like we are talking about a place that like Target doesn't define democracy or like U.S. like legitimacy. Like they walked into the Capitol, and like a person died. Right. Like
Wait,
these are
so
two
someone
completely
died?
different things. Yeah, someone died today. So
I
like,
think it was Trump supporter. Yeah.
Oh,
like,
so it
very
wasn't a
confused.
police officer or anyone like that. It was just a attendee.
Yeah.
No,
I
Okay.
have to look into it. Yeah, but somebody did die today too. So I'm just very confused. Like already in like a 4-hour process, like one person was dead. Like why didn't we have that swift response? Right. It's just weird.
I think it was a Trump supporter, but I'm not 100% certain.
I think it was the Trump supporter. They were shot inside by
A officer.
an officer,
Yep.
a member of the Secret Service. What was it? No, National Guard, something like that. Yeah, but no, it was definitely a Trump supporter. It wasn't an officer or a member of the National Guard or anything. It was a Trump supporter who died.
Could we talk about Trump's? Did y'all watch Trump's kind of response or like his call to peace and the messaging? What was y'all thoughts of that? I thought that was also like very like a two-sided message. Like one, it was not clear like whether or not
Yeah, that
it like protests should be happening, and two, like I'm asking this from like a conservative point of view. Do you think that that was like a effective response that Trump made?
I will say this. There was obviously like January 6th, there's this like protest at the Capitol. It was like obviously like something that was like planned out. And I do not know why there wasn't security there. That seems very suspicious. I literally makes no sense to me. And then the other point.
Well, so I disagree on. Well, yeah, it's a little suspicious that security wasn't there.
Like how
But
it just walks
there's
into the
never been
Capitol. Oh,
there's never been a propensity of violence between any Trump supporters besides Charlottesville.
well, is there
and I
anything
run
that
around.
he could have
And
said
then-
or done
and
that
then-
would have like been like this was convincing? He really tried to
Oh,
stop this.
okay,
Was
okay.
there like literally anything he could have done?
And then,
Like honestly,
yeah.
I
I think
mean-
yeah. I think yeah. I
like it
think
was
he
like
could've-
literally over 7 tweets and a video message. I mean, this is almost 10 tweets about like literally causing peace, do not get violent. And
I mean, but none of those things got to the root. Like, I can call for peace and then in the same breath still say that the reason why you're protesting is legitimate.
there were Democratic leaders calling for peace during the riots and looting earlier this year. Pretty
were
much
Democratic-
radio silent. There were a few.
No, I disagree.
There were a few, but pretty much radio silent.
I
I
think,
think
the
it's a
thing
question of. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say I still think the difference between BLM though and Trump supporters is it again that like BLM is a movement about like Black lives. It's not affiliated with like just a political party. It's a movement, like a humanitarian movement. It really shouldn't have been politicized, but it's become that. As to where like with Donald Trump supporters, I mean, they're very clearly specifically aligned with Donald Trump. And a word from him saying like, oh, there, you know, that there was an election fraud or whatever he needed to do to make there be peace, he could have told supporters that. But like a Democrat, like, you know, Bernie Sanders can't go to like the whole of like Black America and be like, hey guys, knock it off. You know, it's not cool to do this. It's like not really like equitable, right?
Yeah, but Trump did do that 7 times or however many times today.
7 times today.
He didn't do it effectively. You can't, like Harut said, you can't say,
Who's
hey
just
guys,
saying who
stop
does it
protesting.
effectively?
Huh?
Look at the
You're,
damage
like,
that's been done across the nations in terms of like windows broken and lives lost. I mean, over 20 lives lost, over multiple cities, over multiple months.
No, I get it, but this
Businesses have
is
to board up their businesses because they lived in fear.
It's a question
Of
of the
this mob.
legitimacy for the protest.
it's a
Like the legitimacy is like BLM is protesting, as John was saying, because like Black people are dying on the streets and they feel a need to put their lives on the line and protest against that issue. Are you guys like willing to defend that there was like 1 electoral like fraud, and then 2, like if you think that there was electoral fraud, like the reaction
we're
that
dying for.
happened like was warranted? Because if it was, look, if there was electoral fraud, like, and people were like protesting shit, I'd be like, oh shit, like, yeah, maybe this is some shady stuff, right? But like there isn't. Like every US like agency has announced that this was like a fair and free election, right? Like what happened did happen. And so at that point, when the president is still saying like this election was stolen, that is not a clear message. Like, let's be real. Like that video that he posted, and none of the tweets that he said ever claimed that, look, I lost the election, right? Or did they? Like, you guys are the ones that probably saw the tweets. Did any of them say that actually, like, I lost the election?
4 years must have gone very, very slowly for you, and you must not remember about the women with the pussy hats and the women's marches and marches on DC constantly. I mean, literally people in the streets screaming no. And it's been 4 years of Russiagate. The Democrats have never once accepted the legitimacy of Donald Trump's election, but you expect Republicans to just turn over and accept?
Okay, first of all, like Trump got stuff done, so at some
They
point
literally had
in
the
the 4
fight
years,
or the Ukraine call.
not comparable at all.
that's not the issue. First of all, Trump got stuff done is in his presidency. So whether we like it or not, there are Democrats across the aisle that clearly have accepted legitimacy of like Trump as president. 1, 2, none of the things that you just said literally answered the one question I posed to you. So like 1, did Trump like clearly identify that the election process was free and fair? And 2, did he admit that he lost?
So that was 2 questions.
Like, it's clear that you guys acknowledge that.
But I was addressing the long soliloquy that you did before you asked those 2 questions. Number 1, did Trump win the election? The state certified it. The Electoral College has voted. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. Second question, remind me again real quick.
Did Trump say that he lost the election today and that people should go home? Like,
he did not say he lost the election today, but he did say they should go home. So
do you think?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so do you think that the appropriate response then would have been, hey, I lost the election. I don't think there's a need for protest. I'm sorry. It's going to be 4 years of this. 2024, here we come.
So,
right?
I just want to point out that, like, I get your point, Harut, but at the same time, even I think like I read some of his tweets. I think he said that you should go home, that there is another way that we can approach this. I think that's like to some extent that he like typed. I think I know like your reaction is like you're probably thinking it's bullshit given like how much like violence he's previously like in other tweets have like called for, you know, but at the same time I think like for this tweet himself where he tweeted that like today, I think if the people don't listen to him, it's not 100% directly his fault, you know. At the point where he's like, there's other methods we can combat this, you should go home, even though he doesn't accept that he lost the election. He still thinks there's peaceful methods in which he can approach this, even though I don't think there is any way that like he could possibly win the election still. I think at least like his point is that we can try other methods rather than violence, you know? That's just.
I'm inclined to agree with both Garrison Lewis and Harut. I don't think Trump's directly responsible for like getting everyone to go home, but I do think that he's responsible for getting us to this point in the first place. Because any president who constantly undermines an election by saying voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud, undermines democracy itself, because now we can chalk up any time a president or a candidate loses, it's voter fraud. It undermines the democratic process, which is exactly what happened today. People refuse to believe election results, and everybody else are lying to them, that the media is lying to them, scientists are lying to them, judges appointed by Trump are lying to them. It gets to the scary point where when you call everyone fake news and voter fraud, and you become the only reliable source in the eyes of your followers, that now everything can be chalked up to lies and deceit, except for the words coming from this one person who is Trump, who unfortunately has spent a large chunk of his life deceiving and lying to people. And so I think it's gotten to the point where, regardless of whether or not Trump could have handled today better or not, we can, I think, definitely all agree that his actions over the last couple of months have led us here. And I don't deny, like what Garrison was saying, that Democrats definitely, with the whole, Russia collusion thing, they definitely tried the same kind of tactic, that Russia was colluding, trying to, destroy the election. But even before Democrats were saying all that, Trump was already saying that there's going to be voter fraud in the 2016 election. He was saying they're trying to steal the elections from me. They're trying to swipe it right out from under me. And then he lost the popular vote and then won the electoral vote. So regardless of how you kind of shake it down, he was still going to lose that election as well if it wasn't for the Electoral College. So everything that he's done and said during his presidency has worked in the direction of undermining democracy itself to get us to this point now where the left and the right are so strongly divided that neither one can trust the other. And it's a problem. I mean, going forward, even if Biden wins this election and any other president we have, people will always be able to chalk things up now to the election was stolen, the election was fraudulent, that, democracy is a sham, that this is a sham, our side didn't win. Both the left and the right now can do that because of this president. Sorry, I don't, and another thing I want to say before we go on too is that we all will definitely have to work on taking turns and listening to each other too, because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. We can all get really heated and passionate, but let's all just, try to keep the vibes good.
Yeah. I also think just one small comment. What John just said, that's not a dig on Republicans or conservatism or anything like that. It's just a dig specifically on Donald Trump and one aspect of his character. It's not a dig like on anything else. It's like just criticizing that one part of Donald Trump. That's it.
Well, then if I can also add a caveat, you said it, you kind of blamed the whole like election fraud on Republicans when Democrats have been doing that for 4 years. So it didn't start, like Donald Trump didn't start it. If anything, Hillary Clinton started it. Or maybe not Hillary Clinton, but her supporters started it.
Well, it started during the election.
No way. I mean, no, it's true. I'm just not trying to echo.
I think the difference was like at that point, if we look back to 2016, at that point, like Hillary Clinton had already made a call to Trump, right? Like on the day of election night, like she congratulated him for winning the election. She said that, you're our president. There were Democrats, like moderate Democrats, that were saying like, like, let's see like where this goes. And like, I didn't want Trump to like mess up America, right? People were like, oh, he's going to mess up America. And we know this. And I was like, I hope he doesn't, right? Like, why would anybody hope that like somebody has like a bad presidency, right? Or like a really like dangerous presidency that upsets America. But like that kind of same like, the democratic process that usually happens in transitions from president to president has not occurred yet, right? So that's why there's all this confusion. And there's only one person that could clear that up, like, and that's Trump. No matter what people feel about it afterwards, right? Like, no, like this was still rigged and whatnot. And then let's do like the whole Russia thing and let's investigate and let's have all these like congressional like whatchamacallit meetings and whatnot. Like those are all after effect reactions to like said fact, right? The said fact was like Donald Trump was our president. But I think that there isn't a clear kind of distinction from the president right now that he is not going to be the president anymore.
You are correct. The only thing I have to say is 4 years ago, the Congress people did object. They just didn't have a senator to join their objection. So there were several Congress people who objected to the certification of Donald Trump to become president. They just didn't get a senator to sign on. The only difference is 4 years later, there are senators to sign on.
Right.
And so the Democrats have been objecting to the legitimacy of this presidency since literally his inauguration day. I mean, Tlaib said, let's impeach this MFer. Like, I mean, like they've been doing it since day one. Brazier said we should fight for impeachment from day one, before he was even in office and he had an impeachable offense. So it's a little bold take, but okay.
I'm just gonna say this. Sorry, I just want to say this real quick. That when that did happen, I think it was on the Senate floor, right, or on the House floor. When that happened though, and they brought forth a proposal, Biden was the one who shot them down and said, I won't hear it. If no senator signed it, it has to be in writing. I'm going to dismiss it.
Yes. He was, yes.
Which fairly Pence also did. He was just like, well, we can take into account because there's writing. They're following the process, and Pence said, I'm here to count the votes.
But to say like Trump's the one who caused this when it happened exactly 4 years ago. Yes, Pence did the same thing Biden did 100%.
Well, I think again though that when we go to this idea of like the Russia collusion and like impeaching Trump, the goal there of Democrats would say that he's not fit to lead the country because he colluded with Russia, a foreign power, to steal the election. I think on the flip side of that, we saw similar things happen with the Obama presidency, where the Republicans were trying to discredit his birth nation, who he was loyal to, that he was a terrorist, all kinds of stuff. So I think that again, this tactic isn't necessarily unique to Trump or to Obama or to any one president. I think this is just kind of people playing politics. Now on the flip side though, that intentionally trying to halt the passing of power from president to president is specific to Trump. He specifically has halted processes, tried to hold back parts of his cabinet from giving information to Biden's cabinet. The peaceful transfer of power has been halted and slowed. Republicans have refused to publicly acknowledge, until today, McConnell publicly acknowledged Biden's win. They've been very slow to do this. As to where, like, I think what Hart and Satvik said earlier, that Hillary Clinton on the night of the election called Donald Trump and congratulated him, and then a few days later publicly announced that she lost the election. So I think it's just been very different from previous presidents to Donald Trump.
Completely different.
I mean, do you think that's a fair assessment of the situation, or?
I mean, I remember the calls for faithless electors. I remember so many people trying in state legislatures trying to overthrow it. I remember the protests on Inauguration Day, and then immediately afterwards, it was just constant bombardment. And so, yeah, the right's given a right. Like I said this earlier, the left wrote the playbook. The right is just now following it, whether it's right or wrong. But like, it's just kind of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, like, of course, like you're saying that, like, legislation and laws and rules can be changed, right? If the left, wrote these rules and this legislation, then of course, and now the right's just now playing along with it. Either way, that they're playing politics. But so long as everyone's doing things legally, right? Like everyone's passing along power, following impeachment processes, these things can either go through or won't go through.
Well, I meant the political playbook, like the riding on the footsteps of Congress, where they're just following the left's playbook. That's how I see it.
I'm not familiar with that. The writing on the steps.
It's just like, okay, so the left from day one fought Trump, and they tried to impeach him, and I've gone through all the stuff that the left has done from Trump from day one. And so that was the playbook that was written. And now the right's looking at this and going, well, if they did that to our president from day one, why shouldn't we do the exact same thing to theirs from day one and just give them 4 years of hell?
Which would totally be fair I would say that like, while I myself am left leaning, that I would say that like, oh, I'd be frustrated and be like, oh, the Republicans aren't letting them get anything done. They're holding Biden at every step. They're fighting him on everything. They're trying to impeach him. I would be frustrated, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, well, they're doing things illegal, right? Like they're not like holding him up. They're not like, you know, intentionally trying to withhold power. Like I think like House Democrats, for example, refusing to pass like a military spending bill is legal and different from Trump withholding his cabinet from passing on important information to Biden and to his cabinet. That's like different, right? Like
not necessarily illegal.
Well, I mean, like it's important for like, I mean, you're right, not necessarily illegal, but like it's unprecedented. I guess what I should say, it's unprecedented that a president would not give like defense information, military information, economic information to the president-elect. It's unprecedented. I guess I would agree with you. I don't actually know if it's illegal, but it's definitely unprecedented.
Right. He's not president until the 20th, so it's not illegal. Yeah.
But I think that it speaks
to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think it's
both.
illegal. I don't think it's illegal, but I think it speaks to the fact that like I don't think the Obama administration kind of had that same reaction to Trump's like election, no matter what they felt, right? Like to my aware, unless you guys know differently, I don't think they were withholding those types of information in terms of like military kind of procedures and like economic things that are happening and like all that other stuff. But
you're right.
Yeah, I think this is a unique instance that we should be kind of like very critical and like examine, because I think it speaks more to like we live in criticizing the election outcomes is one thing. Criticizing the kind of election process is a different thing for me, right? Being mad about the results, yeah, that's fair. Do you all day protest? I really couldn't care, right? Saying that the kind of process was like rigged, that speaks to a higher degree of like legitimacy of our institutions, and I think it's it sets very dangerous precedents for like how people interact with them, right? Like what is to say that people like now not say like, oh, like courts are not legitimate, right? Like et cetera, like oh shit, right? Like what happens if in 2024 they say like the election process isn't legitimate? What's the bright line for these kind of like situation? Like what is legitimacy, what is illegitimacy, right?
I think that it's hypocritical. Well, not hypocritical, but I think like on the left side too, that we have to be careful saying that, because on the left we often call into question like court biases against like people of color, for example. And the reason why I caution against this train of thought is because I don't think anything is necessarily above scrutiny. Like I think that like our court systems could be better. I think that our election process could be better. I think America itself has things that it can improve on. It's just a question of like, what means do we want to go about improving those things, and for what reason? Like, you know, election fraud, of course, that's always a possibility, and it shouldn't be transgressed lightly. Like Trump shouldn't just throw it out there that it's election fraud, and Democrats shouldn't throw it out there lightly either by saying things like, oh, you know, whether or not you believe it, that yeah, Russia stole the election. You know, these are political tools that the left or the right should throw out easily, unless they actually genuinely believe these kinds of things are happening. Because once you do that, you set, like we said before, a dangerous precedent. So I think that on the left, we have this tendency to critique Trump for, you know, for saying like, oh, well, all these things could be fake or falsified. And I do think Democrats do it too. That's why personally, like, I'm aligning myself as someone on the left, not necessarily just a Democrat here, but I do think the Democrats do it too. Sorry, I know you had a reply, Garrison. To both of us, I guess.
Wait, hold on. Before, I think I wanted to mention something real quick. Because when you guys like mentioned the legalities of like Trump's actions, I actually took like a constitutional law class. I don't know like how much I know more than Garrison, of course, because he's a law student, but just wanted to point out that it's not like a very clear line, or it's not like very black and white written, but there's something called like a congressional oversight manual, and it makes sure that like Congress takes necessary steps to ensure like either transitions of power between different presidents, or like the fulfillment of like an executive like responsibility, I guess. So depending on like Congress, or like the steps that Congress takes in order to I guess investigate or like like let's say like January 20 comes and he doesn't want to like release any information, right? Then I guess like at that point Congress would have to probably investigate or something, and then like during that point the possibility of like Trump being in contempt against Congress could also like be in question. It could also be like a question of legality at that point. So I think I just wanted to bring that up. If Garrison.
No, yeah.
I missed that class my first semester. Dang it.
Wait, honestly relatable though.
Okay, cool. I guess you don't really know then. Yeah. I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, I don't want to like I don't want to be like I know this for sure, right?
We can Google it, but it's not a huge point.